This is the Hall Institute of Public Policy's forum. My name is Michael Rickards. I'm here with my colleague, Richard Lee, and our guest today is well-known attorney, Angelo Genova. Angelo, welcome.
Hi, Michael.
Glad to have you here.
Very happy to be here. Very happy.
You are going to be an awardee given the Achievement Award by the Hall Institute at its banquet in March 18th. So we're delighted to have the opportunity really to be able to interview you a little bit about your background and some of the famous cases that you've been involved in a long and distinguished career. You began in Montclair, and you wanted to be a teacher, didn't you?
That was my plan. I had come from a family of teachers. My father was an accountant turned teacher, and he introduced my family into the world of education. And I was the fifth of 8 children, and I watched successively my 4 older sisters go into education. So it seemed like I was destined for that, and off to Montclair State, which then and now I think has one of the preeminent education programs in the state, if not the country.
Why the fall from grace? Why did you become a lawyer?
Well, you know, I was very passionate in the classroom. I student taught. I was very much prepared, but I think I got the bug for lawyering a little bit out of my activities as a student politician or student leader and some of the issues I got involved in. And I found that, at least for my personality, the classroom was a little bit restrictive in terms of what I wanted to do. And I found in myself a sense of advocacy that really didn't, that the classroom wasn't the right place for that.
What branch of law do you were involved in?
Well, you know, my core practice at the start was labor and employment law, and that was actually spawned out of my interest in education. As an undergraduate at Montclair State, I was a student at a time when the faculty was first organizing as a labor union through the American Federation of Teachers. And as a student leader, it was a significant issue because much of what had been the fodder for debate in faculty governance or college governance forums was being converted into topics for collective bargaining. Being a child of the 60s, it was important to me as a student that students had a voice in discussing things like curriculum and faculty performance and the like. And as those issues found their way to the bargaining table, I became educated in and very interested in collective bargaining. That spawned in me an avid interest in labor law and labor and employment law. So that's was my targeted practice area at the start. And in my early career, that's where I made my bones as a lawyer. Probably a decade into my career, I found that I had interests and a skill set that could go beyond that practice area. Incrementally, I would say the first interest beyond labor and employment law came from election law, because I was on parallel tracks, I would suppose. I started doing election law work as part of my interest in politics. And I would say in the last 7 to 8 years, I have found that the courtroom really is the place I like to be. And as a lawyer, I found that the true skill set of a litigator is not so much the subject matter of the law, but the ability to persuade and communicate in the forum in which you do that, which is, I think, what litigators do.
Now, you've worked for a variety of governors
I've had
in
the
your
privilege
career.
of doing
How many altogether?
Well, I have always had the benefit of serving governors not as a state employee, but as a consultant or advisor. And I had my first opportunity to do that with Governor Florio. And it was in his first term, in the waning years of his first term, where he asked me to assist him in addressing concerns and issues and negotiations with our state public employees. Governor McGreevey asked me and my office to do the same thing, and Governor Cody was satisfied that we had done it competently with his predecessor, Governor McGreevey, And Governor Corzine likewise turned to me and my law firm to assist the state. So we've worked with them in that context, and I've also had the benefit of working with each of those governors in my capacity as either counsel to the New Jersey Democratic Party or as counsel to their respective campaigns, which all but in the case of Governor Cody, we served as counsel to those campaigns.
Of those governors, I was just going to ask, of those governors, which is the most accomplished in your judgment?
Unfair question, but let me try to address it this way. I think each of those governors have brought different skill sets to the job. They're very different people. They have very different backgrounds and the like, and those skill sets have spawned successes in different venues. I think most recently Governor Corzine has been underestimated in his capacity to address the state's fiscal concerns. I think time will reveal, particularly going into this next budget cycle, how extraordinary Governor Corzine was in fashioning a balanced budget. Governor Cody had an extraordinary ability to interact with the legislature from where he came, and also an ability to be responsive to the public. The public genuinely liked Governor Cody, and I think continues to do so. And I think that's a testament to his capacity to exude leadership and a sense of confidence about the state. Governor McGreevey was an extraordinarily hard worker. I think the book is not yet written on his successes, and his ability to address tolls on the Parkway, his ability to initiate other changes and reforms to government. Governor McGreevey was the architect of our first pay-to-play law. You know, he's criticized for a variety of things, but history will tell the story of a governor that took the first step to true reform in pay-to-play. Governor Florio, I have a soft spot in my heart for, because he is somebody that saw in me as a young man and as a young lawyer, somebody with promise. He showed confidence in me. He's an extraordinary intellect, and was at the time, and you know, people call him a policy wonk. I always viewed him as a policy wonk with teeth. You know, he very strong-willed, firm in his resolve, forecasted many of the issues we had now, and proposed solutions to many of them that others would not necessarily embrace. He was among the first governors to speak seriously about shared services and about the effect of home rule and our diverse number of communities in the state, and how that is just dragging us down, and what remains the principal issue in our state, and that's the cost of government and who does it.
I was going to ask, you know, we state elected a new governor in November. It's going to be of different parties. I don't know if you'll have the opportunity to continue to work with the administration, but there seems to be no shortage of people offering the new governor advice. I mean, if you had the opportunity, what sort of advice would you give to Governor-elect Christie?
Well, I think Governor-elect Christie's election reflects a real sentiment of the public that they've had enough. And I think the results of this election also represent an impatience, because I think if the public paused and truly studied Governor Corzine's record and saw the incremental changes that were occurring, it may not have been the same result. By the same token, Governor-elect Christie's election reflects a level of impatience that will, I think, can provoke in public officials knee-jerk reactions to problem solving, because the public is impatient. There's a tendency on the part of public officials to act swifter, and the public demands swiftness. I don't know that all these problems can be resolved swiftly. I think many of these problems were long-term in their creation and are long-term in their solution. So the advice I would give Governor Christie is to pause, slow down, think through the solutions. I wouldn't call it pandering, because I don't think that's what he's doing, but be measured in your responses to the public demand. Be mindful of them, be aware of them, clearly be responsive to them, but go slow enough that the solutions that you ultimately arrive upon are implemented in a fashion that don't cause more problems for us.
Yeah. We're also going to have a dynamic we haven't had here in New Jersey in a while, with a governor and legislature of different parties. As we had 8 years of Democrats controlling everything, 8 years of Republicans. Do you think that's a good thing that we have that kind of check and balance?
You know,
there?
I think in life balance is good.
Yeah.
I think that you know, it's unfortunate whether it was the years that there were both Republicans in the White House and in the Congress, or the years of Democrats in our legislature and the governor's office, that more was not accomplished. And I think the same is true in other times in New Jersey history where the same parties have been in power in both of those two branches. And I, as a citizen and as an observer, I've been frustrated when those opportunities are squandered. That being said, I think that with balance comes moderation, more thoughtfulness, and like I said, in life, I think balance is a good thing, and I think in government it's a good thing. So if compromises can be forged, where fundamental principles are not compromised, at least by my party, I think it's a good thing, and something I would encourage. I think we've heard the leaders of both houses of our legislature speak in those terms.
Right.
I think we've heard the governor-elect speak in those terms, and I think he has the capacity to forge not only relationships but compromises, and I'm hoping the best for him as a citizen, as I'm sure a lot of people in our state are. We want to see things resolved that need to be resolved.
If you were asked to put together a public policy agenda for the new governor and the new legislature, what would be the 4 or 5 issues that you would put on top of the agenda?
You know, it almost sounds cliche-like, but I genuinely believe the concept of home rule and the consequences that flow from it are at the core of many of our problems in our state. And I hearken back to Alan Karcher's prescient view of things in that wonderful book that he wrote. And he pretty much gave us a roadmap to the looming disaster that we're facing. And when I talk about the consequences that flow from it, the many policy consequences that flow from our insistence that we be in these 600 school districts or we be in these 570 municipalities, the consequences are legion in so many ways. I mean, our whole education system is driven by the creation of separate districts and the haves and the have-nots, and where our money flows and should flow, and the quality of education. Our law enforcement, you know, the dollars available for quality law enforcement in urban centers pales in comparison to what's available in the suburbs, yet the need is in our urban centers where there's a higher consolidation of populations. Our healthcare, looming healthcare crisis, we see hospitals closing, but many of them are in our urban centers. There's a void and vacuum that is being created by adequate health care for the poor, which are centralized there. You know, apartheid is a strong word, and I don't mean it necessarily in a racial sense, but home rule has created its own form of apartheid, of social and economic and even race issues in our state. And you see it manifest, in my view, in even this election, where, you know, people are running from the problems. You know, they'll run from city to suburb. They'll run from suburb to the farthest west county or the farthest southern county. They'll run from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, or they'll run from Pennsylvania to Florida to avoid property taxes. And property taxes is nothing more than the cost of the priorities that our government set for what the role of government will be and how we'll pay for them. And the problem is, transcends. You can't run away from these problems. And home rule, I think, fosters this misapprehension that you can by living in an enclave that avoids them. Not to wax too philosophical, but, you know, it's the same issue that faces our nation. You know, whether it's dumbing down of a fair wage, you know, and why we complain in this country about wages and the economic gap between the rich and the poor expanding is a function of the fact that you can get things done on a lot cheaper basis in other parts of the world. Well, same principle applies. Is, you know, you can pay a cop a lot cheaper in central Pennsylvania or in Dakota. Therefore, your property taxes are going to be less.
Right.
And so I'm not sure I answered it as a 6 things, Mike, but I think that if I had identified the single most important policy issue in our state is our grappling with the notion of how we govern ourselves, in what forums we govern ourselves, and what entities we govern ourselves, and how we're going to pay for the services and priorities that we set, and addressing the duplication of so many services that are unnecessary.
Now, you've dealt with the issue of, and we have too, at the whole institute, the issue of pension reform. Is there any solution, or at least a way of ameliorating the current pension situation that we have?
Well, we're obviously in a hole, and I guess the starting point is that we all hope the economy turns around and that the investment returns of the pension fund are going to supplement or at least begin to build back the base that's required. But I think your question really goes to the long-term implications of the current systems we have, and those systems are essentially, we have hundreds of thousands, I think the last number I read was 700,000 people in our state that are beneficiaries of our post-retirement pension plan and defined benefit plans. Governor Corzine attempted, I think with a modicum of success, to deal with the problem head-on in collective bargaining. We made some modest progress that I personally am proud of and professionally proud of, by returning back to the retirement eligibility age that existed at the time that Governor DeFrancesco rolled that back by legislation that he introduced. So Governor Corzine brought it to the age of 62 from the age of 55. A dramatic and significant change, which will only be realized down the road in terms of cost. Increasing employee contributions was another result of his bargaining. But the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and one I think we'll see dealt with with Governor Christie, is whether or not you can resolve these things by collective bargaining, and whether or not that's the forum to deal with it, and whether or not labor will have come, and its leadership will have come to recognize that it can't continue like this, and that it's in their interest that maybe it needs to be changed prospectively to preserve what has been gained over the last 2 or 3 decades with the defined benefit plan. So I think that the law in this state allows for changes legislatively, and you don't have to resort to collective bargaining. And for those that are in organized labor, what I'm saying would be of great concern to them, because they believe that it is appropriately a subject for bargaining. If it can't be addressed in bargaining in a way that's satisfactory to the common good, then it may have to resort to be dealt with in a legislative context, and that's an invitation to war, because public employees will feel very strongly about their collectively bargained for rights, and the fact that these are matters that should be collectively bargained. And our legislature and our governor will be tested with whether or not they will want to pursue legislative changes by adopting laws that say we will no longer have a pension plan, a defined benefit plan, we'll have a 401k type plan if we have pension benefits at all, or we will no longer have post-employment retirement benefits. And then I think the government will have to ask itself, as a matter of policy and as an employer, well, if you don't provide those benefits, who do you recruit? Is this just a reaction to the economy we have now? Yes, the private sector is retracting and retreating from those kinds of benefits, but will they be revisited when the economy and the workforce is more competitive and there's a need for people? So there's an ebb and flow to this, and it goes back, Richard and Michael, to what I said before, is obviously there's a great potential for knee-jerk reactions to these problems. Our state is swimming in debt. We have an $8 billion budget deficit. We are on the verge of fiscal calamity. What do you do in that situation? In the private sector, you go into bankruptcy and you discharge your collective bargaining agreements and you unilaterally impose terms and conditions, if the law allows you to do that. That paradigm could work in the short term in the public sector, but doesn't work in the long term. And let's be mindful of the fact that you have career public workers who've invested their lives, foregoing potentially other opportunities that existed in anticipation of the kinds of returns that come with public employment, security, and the like. But like I said before, it all comes down to balance. We are out of balance. There is a middle place that has to be found, one where all the stakeholders have to understand that they have to give. I think labor needs to understand it's time to give more than it has given, although it is, would probably not like to hear those words. But I think from their perspective, it's a matter of survival, because they have a lot at risk by way of collective bargaining. Same token, I think government has to understand that wholesale layoffs of employees only increases our unemployment population, diminishes the services that are provided to the public, and that the latitude that the new governor is going to have, as Governor Corzine realized, and I've seen firsthand at the bargaining table, that the latitude one thinks one has in collective bargaining is severely curtailed by our current laws, by things like binding interest arbitration and the like.
Yeah. You think we're, the issues we've been talking about, pension reform, home rule, they've been on the table for a number of years, and I think the solutions have been politically untenable. Do you think we're at the breaking point now, where we're finally going to see some action?
I think
some
so.
Of those, yeah?
I think the public is clamoring for it, but even putting aside the public demand for it, and that's not to diminish it, government won't be able to function without addressing these things, and it requires true political courage. I think Governor Corzine had that. His approach was incrementally. We may not have the luxury of an incremental approach to these things, given where we are right now, and given our global economy, which is driving a good part of this, so that it's going to require some swifter and more immediate and more firm action. And that's not a bad thing. Maybe we needed to, what do they say, the psychologists, sometimes you need to hit bottom
right,
before you move on. Well, I think we're there.
Okay.
Now you've take off your hat on collective bargaining and put on your one about voting rights. You're one of the outstanding experts in the country on voting rights and the whole question of guaranteeing that, in fact, people's franchise are going to be counted. Give us a little idea of how you got into that and what are the basic principles that have guided you.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about that, because that's my passion and my love, and where I feel most fulfilled as a lawyer. I guess that I stumbled on it. I was a lawyer a couple years out of law school. Actually, I guess I was in law school when I first had the opportunity to work with then Congressman Florio in his first campaign for governor in the Democratic primary of 1977. And when he chose to run in 1981, he was the candidate I supported, and we were successful in the primary. And there were so few of us, I guess they had to find a lawyer to represent the Democratic Party when Governor Florio chose its new chairman. So I guess I was the guy in the room that they figured, well, let's give the kid an opportunity. So I became counsel to the New Jersey Democratic Party, and we ran for Governor Florio, and we lost in the closest statewide election in our history. In that election, Governor Florio's campaign was visited on Election Day with a very aggressive effort by the Republican National Committee and the New Jersey Republican State Committee, which we believed, and to this day believe, was designed to suppress minority voters from participating in urban districts throughout our state, Trenton, Newark, Camden, and Asbury Park, and other places. Those events spawned a Voting Rights Act litigation. As in most political campaigns, in the aftermath of close elections, there's a great deal of excitement. There's a recount, there's a recheck, but after the dust settles and a winner is declared, there's not too much interest. But given my role as state party counsel, and given the leadership of then Chairman Jim Maloney, a great man, and Jim Florio's former law partner, we felt it was an important enough issue to continue. And we proceeded with the litigation. And that litigation lasted 2 years through depositions and discovery, and ultimately led to the entry of a precedent-setting consent order entered by Judge Dickinson Debevoise, which prescribed the kind of conduct that we had seen on that election day in 1981 from ever again being executed by the Republican National Committee or the New Jersey Republican State Committee in this state. Surprisingly to me, although with great gratitude, that consent order proved to be seminal in its implementation and a very important tool for voters and particularly minority voters to ensure their participation in many, many elections since then. It was modified over time. It required pre-clearance of certain ballot security programs and the like. But it survived many, many years, and in fact, in the 1997 presidential race, it was, it would have been, I guess, 2004, the Kerry race, that it became the basis for African American voters to gain access to the polls in Ohio when there were certain challenge programs that were implemented. So it has had great viability, and I have been fortunate to be a lawyer that was one of the architects of its contents and one of its chief advocates, and a lawyer that many of people turn to, particularly partisans, my party, turn to enforce over the last 30 years. Most recently, that order was challenged by the Republican National Committee. I was pleased to learn yesterday that Judge Deborah Boyce upheld the order, did not dissolve it, modified it a bit, but modified it in a way that I think was appropriate after 30 years. But over the course of time, in addition to that consent order and serving as a lawyer for partisans, I came to understand intimately our electoral system, saw over the years things that showed how fragile that system or it was and remains. I think we saw it as recently as Bush versus Gore, and we continue to see it in close elections, the Franken-Coleman election, and that we have a fragile system, and the importance of people's access to the polls is paramount to the survival and maintenance of our democracy. And I don't think there's anything better a lawyer that has an interest in election law can be doing, is making sure the polls are accessible and available for people to participate in. And I'm proud to have been part of that, and if I leave a legacy in the law, I hope that's part of it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's very gratifying, and you're to be commended for your work on that issue. You mentioned during the course of our conversation a number of things that happened when you were young, people taking a chance on you or having confidence in you. What do you think we need to do today to make sure that young people stay active in government and politics? Like, so many of them seem to be cynical about the system or feel that maybe it doesn't offer them, something.
Well, like many things in life, it starts at home. Mm-hmm. And I think if parents take an interest and if they spend the time to read, and people talk about the waning days of newspapers. Well, the upside is that to the extent you have a laptop at home, it's pretty easy to get the news, and there aren't too many excuses, I think, in a household with internet capacity to know what's going on. And there's always television, traditional television. But I think parents who are informed breed children who are informed. So I think that's a starting point. I think our schools need to make part of the fabric of curriculums something we probably remember as children, civics classes, and the role of government in our lives. And it has to be tangible, and people need to be educated in understanding how tangible it is and how it affects them. Harry Pizicki's group, the Center for Civic Responsibility, I think, has taken the bull by the horns. I guess somebody didn't like what I
guess so, yeah.
So they're sending him for me. But,
that's our audience.
Yeah. But I commend them for taking the bull by the horns and filling this vacuum. And I've spoken to his group about different community organizations that can intersect with the Center for Civic Responsibility on achieving that kind of education with young people. I serve on the Boys and Girls Club of Newark, and I see firsthand how important mentoring is, and I think a more aggressive mentoring of young people in showing that connection between their lives and government. And I think in the end, part of the problem is that the cynicism just transcends young people. There is great cynicisms for people, cynicism about people in public life, about politicians, about what politicians do and why they do it. And there's been a broad brush painted by virtue of the admitted corruption of some on the many who are well-meaning, have a lot to offer, have invested their lives in trying to make our world better, and we need to respect that vocation. We respect athletes in this country. We respect, or at least are interested in, entertainers. I think the problem is deeper than politics. I think the problem is we've got to get our priorities in order, and among those priorities is there is honor in public service, and we've lost that. When we restore that, then I think young people will pay more attention to it.
Only 47% of the people that could vote did vote in the last governor's race. That means half the people really chose not to exercise their franchise. How important is voting anyhow? why fight for the right to vote if half of us choose not to exercise it?
Tragedy, huh? Real tragedy in my view. I'm reading a book now, which I wish I had read, but it wasn't printed before my father died. But it's on the invasion of Italy during the Second World War, and the Italian invasion doesn't get the attention of the Normandy invasion, but it was as significant a military event in that theater as Normandy. And my father was part of that invasion, and I read with interest a chapter which discussed why it was our young men went to war and what they were told. And you know, there was the flowery stuff, and there was also the practical stuff. And I think Ernie Pyle once quoted a young soldier saying, "I went to war because I was drafted." But there was in that generation a full appreciation of our democracy. And I think at the heart of that war was a recognition that our way of life was at risk. And our way of life in this country meant and means to this day democracy. And I think there's an absence of appreciation in our democracy. I think that recent generations haven't, although one would think with events like 9/11, would see that it's at risk, just have come, like many things in life, not to appreciate what we have. And what we have in our democracy is truly sacred. And if one reads the words of the Founding Fathers, if one reads Thomas Paine's Common Sense, if one reads the Federalist Papers, one will know immediately what a treasure we have, and we need to preserve it. And when you see people turn away from the polling place, which is at the heart of what democracy means, the right to be involved in the selection of our leaders, it's sad. You know, my wife, who's wonderful, but not political, when we talk about this, she says, "Well, you know, my vote doesn't count." And I guess the answer I give to her, I would give to others, in that you only know it counts when it would have made a difference. And what I mean by that is that our elections are getting closer, and it makes a difference all the time, because when there's 53% of the people staying home, an outcome could have been different. We only have to harken back to Bush versus Gore, and whether you're a Gore supporter or a Bush supporter, you do know that those 8 years would have been very different under an Al Gore presidency or a George Bush presidency. Maybe you like what it was, but if you don't like what it was, you do know that the difference would have been affected by your participation.
Thank you very much. Our guest today has been Angelo Genova. Angelo, thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
sharing
Michael.
your thoughts with
Thanks,
us.
Richard.
With Richard and me, on behalf of the Hall Institute Forum, we are pleased to be able to bring you this production once again. Good day.
Thank you.